Good morning, everyone. You're all very welcome here today for what is a very important topic for a number of our organisations. I'm delighted to have so many of you here present because of the launch of our pre-budget submission for 2023. I'd also like to welcome our TDs as well, who are present here with us this afternoon. We thank you for your time and your valuable input into this particular launch today. There are a couple of things that I would like to draw your attention to. During the course of this webinar, we will be asking people to use the hashtag cost of living and hashtag budget 23, and you can follow mental health reform on social media throughout the course of this webinar, but also in relation to contacting your local TD in order to promote what we are asking the government in relation to mental health needs. And just to, really to give an overview as to what we are looking for from the government, we are looking for an increased funding of approximately 75 million in order to develop the services and to address unmet needs, and also to maintain the current existing services with 25 million. So in total, we're looking for 100 million euro. Obviously, since COVID, there has been a lot of pressure put on mental health services, and that has particularly grown in relation to the needs of individuals. And, the funding that we have currently is not actually meeting the needs, and we do need an increase in the mental health budget. Some of the top areas that we are looking for is prioritised mental health services, increasing the spend of mental health to 10% of the total health budget by 2024, reinstating the national lead of mental health, reporting directly to the CEO of the HSE. We're also looking for resources in 2023 in relation to sharing the vision, the implementation plan, addressing the waiting lists and improve the standard of care in child and adolescent mental health services, resourcing the legislative changes in the reform of the Mental Health Act 2001, fund an independent advocacy service for people with mental health difficulties, invest in the individual placement and support schemes, and to improve mental health supports for priority groups, including LGBTI and people who are marginalised. These are the areas that we are actually calling upon the government to invest in, which is really important for everybody's mental health. We also need the government to look at supporting the voluntary and community sector. A much needed support is needed there because they are at the cold face of people who are suffering from mental health issues and challenges, and appropriately fund those organisations who are actually working within the communities and have a collaborative approach in relation to this as well. So I'm going to hand you over to Suzanne Weedle, who will actually give us an overview. She is the Policy Advocacy Coordinator of Mental Health Reform, and she will have a presentation to present to us here this afternoon.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And hello, everybody. It's lovely to meet you all virtually. So my job today is to give you a sneak preview of what our pre-budget submission is all about, and hopefully make you very keen to read the full submission afterwards. I promise you it's well worth the read. I'm going to start with a bit of context of how we developed our pre-budget submission. So everything we do in mental health reform is centered around the lived experience voice. So we started with conducting a public and member survey of people's experiences of mental health services in Ireland. And we received over 300 responses to this. And I just wanted to take a moment to say how incredibly grateful we are for all the responses, that each and every single response was read and heard and listened to. And we've been very moved by people's stories. And even if they're not featured in our pre-budget submission, we did read them. They will inform our ongoing work, and it meant an awful lot to us. So thank you to everybody who participated in that. We also had a meeting with some of our member organisations, and we're very, very grateful for their expertise and insight. We liaised with our colleagues in the HSC Mental Health Services, and again, we're very grateful for their ongoing collaboration. And then we obviously did desk research around what are the needs for mental health in 2023. So on the next slide here now, I'm just going to give you an insight into the respondents who had direct lived experience of mental health services in our survey. So of our over 300 responses, 275 of those people had direct experience. And as you can see, half of them reported they had a negative experience, 37% reported a mixed experience, and 13% reported a positive experience. So as you can see, we have a long way to go in terms of the mental health needs of services meeting the needs of those who access them. So that brings us to the question of what do we need to invest in? In our next slide here, we have the breakdown of what Michelle was speaking about, our overview of 100 million, an additional 100 million euro investment into mental health for budget 2023. 25 million of that towards the maintenance of existing levels of service, and 75 million into the development of services for the unmet need. So I'm going to talk you through a bit of a breakdown of what that 75 million consists of. So on the next slide, we have a number of asks here. In terms of investment in leadership, as Michelle spoke about, we've been calling for the reinstatement of the National Lead for Mental Health for many years now, which is really pivotal for oversight and governance. And it's really important that the pockets of very innovative mental health care that we do have across Ireland are replicated nationally, and that there is governance over the replication of these things. In terms of investment, unfortunately, Ireland's spend on mental health has remained at around between 5 and 6% of our health budget over the last number of years. As you can see, it's well below what our own policies recommend. So our previous mental health policy, A Vision for Change, recommended 18% by 2016, and Sláintecare recommended at least 10% back in 2017. It's also less than half of what comparable European countries spend on mental health. So if we look at the UK, they spend almost 15%, and France spends over 14% of their health budget on mental health. We've largely structured our pre-budget submission around the implementation plan of Sharing the Vision. So Sharing the Vision is our national mental health policy, and the implementation plan outlines what needs to be done each year in order for this to actually be achieved on the ground. So within that, we've looked at 6 particular national clinical programs in the implementation plan. We won't have time to go through them today, but it's a little teaser of what you can see in the full submission. In terms of the voluntary and community sector, I'm sure you've all seen the media coverage recently about the increase in calls to helplines, not only because of the impact of the pandemic, but also the mental health impacts of the cost of living crisis. This is just one area of increase in demand for the sector. And we also have our Brave New Connections report, which kind of delves in more detail into the impacts of the pandemic on the mental health, voluntary and community sector. So I definitely recommend taking a look at that. There's very clear need for more funding in the area. And I think the most pivotal part of this funding needs to be long-term and multi-annual in order for organisations to plan and sustain these vital services. In terms of the child and adolescent mental health services, we're going to hear from a parent with lived experience of their child going through mental health services a bit later. But just to say, it's important to, I suppose, draw attention to the deficits in our child and adolescent mental health services. And I think particularly with the Maskey report this year, we were very, very aware of the improvements needed. And I wanted to move on to the next slide now and show you a bit of a visual representation of the increase in our waiting lists in CAMHS over the years. So if we look back at December 2019 up to the most recent statistics we have, May 2022, there's a more than 60% increase in our CAMHS waiting lists. And I think it's important to think about the individuals behind these figures. I think we're often looking at the high level statistics, and we forget to take a moment to think that this is over 4,000 children and adolescents that are waiting for adequate mental health care. It's also over 4,000 families and supporters who are waiting for their children to receive that support. In terms of our other asks, we have another slide now with the last 4 of our asks. So Michelle was talking there earlier about legislative change. So we're very excited here at Mental Health Reform about the reform of the Mental Health Act. We're incredibly grateful that we've been in front of the Subcommittee on Mental Health twice as part of the pre-legislative scrutiny of this process. But I think it's important to note that the implementation of this legislation is going to require funding. There's significant changes in the structuring and the implementation of mental health services with this Act. And without funding to support this, it won't become a reality on the floor. In terms of advocacy, we have been delighted to hear that the Youth Advocate Programme's advocacy service for CAM services has been expanding. But it's important to remember that we need an independent advocacy service nationally. It needs to be across child and adolescent and adult mental health services. It needs to be across community and inpatient services. And this again has been promised in the National Disability Inclusion Strategy. In terms of individual placement and support, this is an employment support service for people with mental health difficulties. It has seen incredible success in securing, and I think most importantly, sustaining employment for people with mental health difficulties, but it needs funding for expansion. It's not yet nationally available, and no matter where you live in Ireland, you should have equal access to employment support because, as we know, it has a really important part to play in mental health recovery. In terms of priority groups, now when we say priority groups, we're referring to the priority groups identified in Sharing the Vision, the National Mental Health Policy. And in our pre-budget submission, we focused on 3 particular groups within this, largely based on the high need in terms of mental health in these groups, but also in line with the work that mental health reform we've done this year. So all of these groups have higher instances of mental health difficulties than the general population. In terms of people who identify as LGBT+, this year in June, Mental Health Reform launched our My LGBT+ Voice Matters report. And this report is a real testament to the participants because they identified the challenges and the difficulties faced as users of mental health services, but they also came up with incredibly innovative solutions. So I'd really recommend giving that a read. In terms of ethnic minorities, we also have our Cultural Competencies Toolkit, which speaks through the needs of mental health service users from ethnic minority communities. And within this pre-budget submission, we've also done a particular section on traveller mental health. I think we've seen incredible advocacy and lobbying from the traveller community and from many of our member organisations this year. And they face stark inequalities when it comes to mental health care. So it was a really important part of our pre-budget submission this year. In terms of the prison population, according to the Mental Health Commission, Ireland is far behind comparable countries when it comes to providing mental health care for those who come in contact with our criminal justice system. It's another drastically underserved community. And one of our member organisations, the Irish Penal Reform Trust, do incredible work around this. And they have a report every year. It's called the PIPS report, the Progress in the Penal System report. And there you can find a lot more details about the state of affairs for mental health in prison at the moment. That's a kind of a whistle-stop tour. I'm going to end here with a lived experience voice. This is one of our survey respondents who is a user of mental health services. And they said, most people don't seek help because they think they'll need it in a few months. They seek help because they need it right now. So we're asking the government to consider not just the cost of living in this year's budget, but also the cost of waiting for adequate mental health care. And we believe together we can make a difference on this, and that's what today is all about. And we'll show you all of our hashtags and our Uplift campaign and everything again at the end. So thank you for listening to my ramble on that, and I hope I piqued your interest in reading our full submission. I'm going to hand you now over to our interim CEO, Roisin Clarke.
Hi, thank you so much for that, Susanna. That was excellent. And I just, before I move on, I would just like to echo what Susanna mentioned there. I think it's really important that we remember the people behind the figures. We can sometimes become very accustomed to and immune to seeing numbers, but it's really important to remember that there are people behind these. So as Susanna said, my name is Roisin Clarke and I am Interim CEO of Mental Health Reform. And I would like to thank everybody for joining us here today. As a coalition, our members are at the core of everything that we do. And as you've seen, Mental Health Reform represents 81 member organisations from all across Ireland, all voluntary and community organisations providing crucial mental health services and supports and education in our communities. Throughout the challenges of the recent years, our members have shown immense agility and resilience, and they continue to do so amidst an ever-increasing demand for services. The immediacy of the pandemic may appear to have receded, but we must acknowledge that not only will its impact be felt long into the future, but it has compounded a pre-existing mental health crisis in our country. The importance of the work of our member organisations and their dedication to the service users is not only inspiring, but it's essential in providing access to help and support to people when and where it is most needed. Our pre-budget submission being launched here today is informed by our members, and it represents their voices. And we are again facing into challenging times, but mental health must remain a national priority. So it's important and fitting that we have the opportunity to hear from some of our member organisations. And I'm really delighted to welcome Paula Lawler, CEO of Suicide or Survive, and Hugh Morley, Head of Business Cork Counselling Services, here today.
Lovely to be with you, Roisin.
Well, you're very welcome.
I'm so sorry for interrupting, guys. Just before we start, Bear Grogan here, you'll be hearing from me later. Just to say, we have a slide that we can show before our video with support lines and numbers. And just to say, you know, we have some difficult conversations here today, and we understand that people might be triggered or upset by some of the conversations. So we will show that slide later on, and there are supports on our website as well. Okay, thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing from Paula and Hugh.
Thanks, Bear.
Thanks, Bear.
That's really important, Bear. Thanks a million for that. So Paula and you, thank you so much for joining us here today. And Paula, I'll come to you first. Suicide or Survive is a national suicide prevention and mental health promotion charity. Can you talk to us about how Suicide or Survive came to be and how it was founded?
Yeah, so Suicide or Survive was founded by a lady called Caroline McGuigan. Caroline had her own quite serious struggles with depression and anxiety in her 20s, and made a very serious suicide attempt, and spent 8 years as a user of our mental health services. And Caroline founded the organisation at her kitchen table. She would say that she founded it initially out of anger, that she, as on her journey, on her recovery journey and her journey through her own difficulties, she felt that there were things that were missing. She started to have a look, as she started to recover, particularly from her suicide attempt, she started to think about what was missing. What were the things that could have been helpful to me on this journey, that might have either made the journey easier for me or allowed me to have a different journey. And she also spoke to people who had been on those kind of similar journeys, who she had met on her way, and did some research into what was available for people. And she founded the organisation with our Eden programme, because she felt that there were gaps in service provision for people who had attempted suicide or were contemplating suicide. And Caroline would be very open about the fact that actually for herself, stigma stopped her from speaking out. Stigma stopped her from reaching out. She had the most wonderful people around her, who she had great support from her family and from her friends, but she couldn't bring herself to speak to them. So stigma was a big issue for her. And so she founded the Eden programme at her kitchen table in 2003. And then the organisation kind of grew from that. And Eden is our flagship programme. It's a programme for people who have attempted or contemplated suicide, and fills that gap that Caroline felt was there, or believed that was there for her, which was a safe space where people could come, they could say out loud, I am thinking of taking my life, and could be provided with supports, could be provided with education that would enable them to take personal responsibility and look after their own mental health, and build a range of supports that are appropriate to their specific needs, so that they can move away from suicide as an option of choice in times of crisis. So that we run a suite of educational programs, and they very much educational programs. So Eden isn't a therapeutic program, it's an educational program with a therapeutic element that runs one morning a week for 26 weeks. And that's something else that Caroline felt that was missing, was the time for people to stand back, to actually start looking at what could benefit them, and then actually start to take those steps in a supported environment where they had that support. So she had a very strong desire to harness people's strength, Joe, because we all have
Incredible.
strengths, even when we're struggling, you know, for people to be able to harness their strength, and then to provide them with tools they can use to improve their own mental wellness. And because it comes from, our organization is founded on a very strong belief that everybody has the capability of living a full life, regardless of how difficult their mental health struggles have been.
Absolutely, you're dead right, Paula. It's an incredible story, you know, and some of the best things start at kitchen tables.
Absolutely.
I have to say, no, that's amazing. And you mentioned there the Eden program, and Suicide or Survive provides various different programs and workshops to a wide range and array of different groups. And that ranges, I understand, Paula, from prisoners and employees to family members and people affected by suicide. Can you tell us a little bit about what the impact of the work has been?
Yeah, I mean, we evaluate all our programs as we go along, and we get all of our programs externally evaluated periodically. And people say to us that one of the big changes that people see is a breakdown in stigma, that they actually feel able to speak about mental health. They feel more able to reach out for help. And particularly when we were working in the prison, because that's a very different, we've worked in male prisons and we've worked in DOCA Centre Female Prison. And that's an area where there's a lot of stigma still, and people find it really difficult to speak about their mental health. And certainly we've run our wellness workshops and our RAP programs there, and the people there would say, I feel more able to reach out for support. I feel more able to ask for help. And it's the same with our wellness workshops and our Eden program. The Eden program, people turn their lives around. On this year's Eden programs, we had in week 8 of one of our Eden programs, we had 2 people come in and say, do you know what, I've made the decision that I want to live. Wow. So that's week 8 of a 26-week program. And one of those people said, look, at my decision, I want to live my life in colour now.
It's incredible,
not just in black and white or grey, but in colour. And that's what people get from our Eden program. They actually move away from suicide. Our supporters program is for family members who were supporting, or friends or work colleagues who were supporting somebody in their lives who's struggling with their mental health. And it teaches them self-care skills and the skills of how to support people. And again, they say to us, they don't feel as alone, because they're in a group with other people who are in similar experience, and supporting somebody can be quite isolating. They feel equipped to have conversations and to support in a more effective manner, and they are more inclined to look after their own self-care, which we know it can be really difficult.
So important. It can be very isolating, can't it, as a supporter? Yeah, it's a really important aspect of your work, I think, Paula.
Absolutely. And people also say then from our wellness workshop that they're equipped with the tools, basic everyday tools that they can use to mind their mental health. And I suppose we encourage people to start to take a proactive approach to our mental health. Very often we wait until we start to struggle before we start to look after our mental health, and we kind of do it out of desperation. And then when we get better, we kind of forget about it and leave it behind us. So our wellness workshops are really encouraging people to take a proactive approach to look after your mental health when you're well.
There you have it, Paula.
Because we don't know when any of us are going to struggle, or maybe find ourselves having those darker thoughts, those suicidal thoughts. So it's about taking control of your mental health, looking after your mental health, simple, practical, and effective things that anybody can do.
And Paula, I think in educating people like that, it has a ripple effect as well, doesn't it? It really kind of goes out into the broader family and into the community as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, because each of us has our connections. And also people will talk about what they've learned, they'll share their tips and tools with other people, but most importantly, they're speaking about mental health. And we're breaking down the stigma, the taboo, trying to get rid of that taboo. And the workplace is another area where there's huge stigma. And we work with organizations to try and help them to have those conversations, to be able to open the conversation, not to be afraid to say, I'm struggling. And for employers to be able to say, well, just the fact that that person is struggling doesn't make them any less capable. They might need a bit of extra support, but let's have those conversations. Let's find out, and let's put the appropriate support in place, or signpost people to the appropriate supports.
Fantastic. And I think we are seeing some changes and people opening to talking more, aren't we? And it's in no small part, Paula, to the work of the likes of yourself. So it's incredible. I have a big question for you now. What is your vision for Suicide or Survive in the future, Paula?
I suppose it's suicide to survive. We have a vision for Ireland rather than for suicide to survive, you know, and our vision is a world where everyone is empowered to look after their mental health and fewer people die by suicide. That's our vision for the world, for Ireland and for the world, actually. So our vision for our organisation is to be continue to play a part in that, to increase our role in that, to have particularly our Eden programme available for people where they need it, when they need it, so they don't have to wait. And we're talking today about the cost of waiting, so that they don't have to wait, because people come looking for help when they need it, you know, and so that we can have that, and that all of our programs are expanded and developed, and we can meet emerging needs, that we're not sticking back and saying, okay, what we're doing is great, that actually we're constantly looking at what emerging needs are. But as I said, my vision is that we wouldn't be needed, you know.
No. And that's an admirable one, Paula. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to get insight into your work, and you know, I'm just struck by the variety of the programs and the different groups, Paula, that you provide help and support to. So thank you. And if I could say, just congratulations to you and your team for the work that you do, because it's so important and so needed. So thank you very much, Paula. And Hugh, I'm going to come to you now. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
And thanks so much again for being with us here today.
Thanks, Roisin.
So Cork Counselling Services is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, and it's a remarkable achievement, isn't it? Yes. So when Cork Counselling Services first opened its doors in 1982, it was one of the first centres in the south of Ireland to provide counselling. So can you talk to us a little bit about how the organisation has evolved since those early days, and what the main changes are that might have taken place since then?
Sure. Thanks, Roisin. Paula spoke about being started at the kitchen table. Our story is that it was a dining room table, so that might
just
be a bit of one-upmanship. Very, very early on, started by a German woman who came to Ireland and saw that there wasn't counselling psychotherapy support. There was the church and there was the state agency, mainly through the medical model for mental health. And there was nothing on the community, you know, in the community of the community, provided by the community, that was missing. And for the last 40 years, we've been trying to fill that gap by having our offices and our centre in the middle of Cork City, between the Norries and the Southsiders, you know, available on self-referral basis, so you don't even have to go to the doctor for mental health. And regardless of, I suppose, ability to pay is the big one now, but it used to be things like religion, sexual orientation, marital status, things like that, that thank God our society has opened up. But you know, we and other organizations, we're on the forefront of that. And you know, we're now one of many similar counselling organizations in the community under the umbrella of the AACPI. And I know that Sarah Jane Henley is with us today, representing those. But you know, so we're talking together now, just trying to get this idea of community mental health easily accessible. We're not time limited like some of the other services. We don't stop people after 6 sessions. You know, chronic problems require chronic solutions sometimes, and we're there for that. So that's, you know, the voice we want to express this morning. We had our 40th anniversary on Friday night. It would be churlish not to acknowledge that Colin was there in the room, and I'm hoping, Colin, you got a sense of what happens when you bring LGBT and travellers and clients and politicians and counsellors into a room. I hope you had a good night. We had pipers and music.
It was a really fantastic night, and really very good contributions made by everyone at it.
Yeah,
really, I learned a lot from it, I must say.
Great, thank you. And I hope you felt, you know, some of the energy there, that when something is on a community level, the money mightn't be there, but the goodwill and the energy is. And you know, to acknowledge the support we had from Roisin and Mark's party as well at that. But I saw you there all night, so it would be churlish not to recognise that. You know, in terms
recording in progress.
In terms of our track record, I'm hearing my talk in my ears.
You're back there now. That's grand. Go ahead.
Thanks, Roisin. Our evolution, you asked me about, Roisin. I mean, we're now a social enterprise, which means we try to earn our way. At the moment, we have 7 whole-time equivalents. We have something like 25 volunteer and student counsellors. and we're getting about 200,000 from the state each year. I mean, that's pretty good value you're getting. I mean, it's just not workable really, and we've been struggling for 40 years on that kind of low interest. I mean, the vision is all there. We're very aligned with Vision for Change, but the money has never been there. So we don't struggle with what we want or what we'd like to see, because that's all written down. You know, read the Vision for Change, read the share for Vision for Change. You know, community mental health is right in there, but the money is not. And it's, you know, it's quite, I could get angry, it's quite scandalous that our staff are on 75% of HSE level salaries with no pensions. Why? Because we've never got the money. In fact, we're still on 2009. We had more money then than we do now, because we were cut back then, and it was never restored because we're not part of. I could go on and on. I don't want to annoy people, but there's an anger too that the money doesn't support the activity.
I understand you, and you know, in our pre-budget submission, we are calling on the government to provide long-term and multi-annual funding to support organisations like yours in the voluntary community sector, and I think you've outlined there how important that is, and how much that would impact the people that you can reach and the service that you can provide. But I'm really interested in a point. I'm kind of struck that, you know, as your organisation, you as a forerunner and pioneering the provision of those services in Cork, you're now working with other organisations and really trying to take a broader collaborative approach in making sure that people have the access to the services and supports they need.
Yes, I suppose the ease of access through the self-referral, you simply fill in a form and then we meet for an assessment meeting always within 2 weeks. There is then a waiting list, which were shorter, but that's, you know, resource based. And I'm very much aware of Susanna's last slide there about saying, you know, you don't need help in 3 months' time, you need it now. And we can meet them now, but we really can't service the need. I suppose our work is not, it may be crisis driven, but the work is developmental. It's, you know, it takes time, and mental health issues develop over time and they're healed over time. And we're there for the long haul. I mean, 40 years is a long time. If we had done something wrong, I don't think we'd be around, you know, and
absolutely.
And yet we're appealing for that investment and the recognition of our work. Sometimes we're so busy doing the work that we don't have time for the very fine efforts such as today, and, you know, going out there, having our voice heard in a very busy spectrum.
No, absolutely, and that's why it's so important that you joined us here today, to be able to give us your perspective.
And we're so glad of mental health reform. Yeah.
But, you know, actually, just to say as well, just that self-referral process, it just facilitates ease of access so well, and I can imagine that is just hugely impactful on the people who need to connect in with your organisation. Just that the process is facilitated in that way.
There's two things I'd say there briefly. First of all, no client in our organization pays nothing. So we really believe that there must be some investment at whatever they can afford. It might only be €1 a session, but, you know, they're going to have some skin in the game. We've never given anything for free, and we've never turned anyone away because they can't pay. That there's a piece in that is important to us. The second piece is where we're also training counsellors. So not only are we providing a service, but we're providing the capacity for service into the future by training community-based counsellors. They're accredited, our work is accredited through the IACP, the Counselling and Psychotherapy body, and accredited also through Coventry University, where they get a degree at Cork's Twin City. So they come out ready to serve the community because of their community experience. And by community experience, I mean they've literally met everybody, all work, class, you know, creed, everything that comes through an open door in the middle of the city. They're not, you know, working on one issue or one particular socio-economic class. So, you know, they really get a good grounding, and that's something that while we don't get funding for that per se, you know, where we see other organizations such as the technical colleges getting funding for training, we say that we give good value. And I'm sure I speak for more than our organizations in saying that, you know, that some of the mental health services on the ground, they give incredible value.
Absolutely, they do. And I think that's so important that part of your work is in that training, because that's the longer term enhancement and building of capacity, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's really important. Well, listen, I want to say congratulations on the anniversary again. And it sounds like it was a good night, and I might have missed a good one.
We'll have another one before the year's out.
I hope you will.
Yeah.
I'd be delighted. It's such incredible and important work, and it's really important, again, just to be able to have you, both of you, here with us today, and to get that insight from your perspective. So Paula Lawler, CEO of Suicide or Survive, and Hugh Morley, Cork Counselling Services, thank you very much for being here with us, and I really appreciate the opportunity to learn more about your work and the people that you reach.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much,
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. So now I would like to hand over to my colleague, Niamh O'Connor. Niamh is Communications and Engagement Manager with Mental Health Reform. And Niamh is going to speak to you briefly ahead of a short video that we would like to share with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roisin, and thank you so much, Paula and Hugh, for your contribution. I would just like to say before I play this video that some viewers watching today might find some of the information at this event distressing. If you need support, you can visit Your Mental Health at hse.ie. It has a range of information on free helplines and resources. And you can also text HELLO to 50808 to start a conversation. This is a free and anonymous service available 24/7. And just to say that Michelle, our chair, will share this information at the end of the event as well if you need it. At Mental Health Reform, our work is very much informed by the views, insights, and experience of people with lived experience of mental health difficulties, their family members, friends, and carers. As we know, for many families and children across the country, accessing timely and appropriate mental health services can be a very challenging experience due to a lack of therapeutic supports in many areas and staffing issues. Sinead is one such parent who has experienced this. Sinead generously shared her story and communicated what she wants to see in Budget 2023 and what changes that she feels are needed in mental health services in Ireland.
My child has a range of complex mental health issues. So they have ADHD, they have OCD, and they have an eating disorder. So each service should be able to give you something that helps the child to deal with those things on a daily basis. So OCD can be quite prevalent. You have self-harm, you have things like the constant hand washing, you have things like checking dates on foods, you have things like intrusive thoughts. And the intrusive thoughts can become quite disturbing for the child, to the point where they're afraid to leave a room in case something bad happens. Then you've got the anxiety that comes with that. And then with the anxiety then comes the afraid to eat things, afraid to drink things. So it's not just like mental health doesn't just mean, oh, you know, that at the moment you're being a bit down. There is a large amount of things that encompass mental health issues. That when we go to CAMHS, we get meds. No other services, no psychology, no OT, no speech and language, no talk therapies, and none of these parapsychology for a few weeks was ever offered. So we just seem to go from one med to the next. So anytime something comes up, or, you know, we need some help with something, or OCD is after getting really bad, it's change meds. Let's change meds. But we're you know, that's all we seem to get. I suppose what I'd like to see most would be for every camps to be staffed appropriately. There is a severe lack of staff, and even retaining the staff that's there is difficult. The minister recently was on about the 73 multidisciplinary teams within CAMS teams, and that's all well and good, and it's lovely saying that there's 73 multidisciplinary teams, but what she neglected to actually say was that they are not fully staffed. So I wish they would stop giving the impression that something is being done, or that things like those teams are staffed and there's all of this wonderful stuff, because that isn't the case. And those of us and those families and us and everybody else that are within CAMS know exactly that these teams are not staffed, that the children and young people are not getting the services, not even that they deserve, but that they need. If this government was in any way thinking about the futures of these children, so these children are going to eventually grow into adults. If you're not going to help them now, you're denying them the right to have a good life to the best of their ability as they get older.
A very powerful message there from Sinead. Next up is our political panel, and I'm delighted to introduce Berg Rogan, our Policy and Research Manager.
Thanks so much, Niamh. Hi everyone. I thought we were going to have a Taylor Swift song there at the end of that. It's so lovely to be here with everyone this morning. We're going to have our political panel now. So we're delighted to be joined by Social Democrats co-leader and do we need to stop sharing the screen? Just wondering. So I have it set on the view for speaker. I'm just wondering, Niamh, if maybe if you stop sharing the screen and we can see our lovely politicians on the screen in front of us. So we're delighted to be joined by Social Democrats co-leader and Party Health spokesperson Roisin Shortall TD, Sinn Féin spokesperson on mental health Mark Ward TD, Fine Gael spokesperson on health Colin Burke TD, and member of the Shannon Civic Engagement Group and chair of the subcommittee on mental health Senator Francis Back. We received apologies today from Green Party TD Deputy Nessa Hurricane, and also from the Minister of State for Mental Health, Fianna Fáil TD, Mary Butler, who will be linking in with later this week and this month. Both Deputy Shortall and Deputy Burke are members of the Oireachtas Health Committee, which has been a little bit busy the last couple of years, and Senators Black and Deputy Ward are members of the Subcommittee on Mental Health, and then Deputy Ward is also a member of the Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth Committee. And I mention all of these things because what a year we have had relating to mental health legislation. You know, we've had two really, really important pieces of legislation going through the pre-legislative scrutiny process. The Heads of Bill to Reform the Mental Health Act 2001, which is a main priority for mental health reform, and the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Amendment Bill 2022. And the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Bill is going to be in with Senator Black soon. It's making its way through both houses and hopefully going to be in the Shannon as soon as they're back on the 14th. So we're very much looking forward to chatting with our panel today. And we really, really appreciate them taking their time out of their busy schedules to be here with us this afternoon. So I'm just going to ask, is there a blank screen for everyone on the main? No? Okay. So what I'll do is, my plan is we have half an hour. So I have a couple of questions to put to the panel. We'll have a chat first about, you know, kind of developments in mental health services over the last year, what has been positive and what needs improvement, because I think it can be very, you know, like the video we just listened to, there is a lot to be very disheartened about, and that is upsetting, and you know, people's lives are being impacted, and the cost of people having to wait for services is huge. So we will talk a little bit about, you know, if any of the positive things that have happened over the past year, and then what needs improvement. So Deputy Shortall, I might come to you first there, if that's okay, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, Bear, and Roisin, and all the rest of the gang. First of all, thanks very much for organising this session. I think it's very worthwhile, and it's something that I look forward to actually every year, because it's certainly hearing from parents and representatives of the different advocacy groups. It's, you know, it just stops you in your tracks and it brings you back down to earth, and you hear the first-hand experience, and that's really important. In terms of the past year, the positives, I suppose, are what you've referred to already in relation to the two important pieces of legislation getting moving at last, and we've been waiting a good while for them. But it's really good to see the Mental Health Act, the reform of the Mental Health Act 2001, now on the move and receiving the attention that it needs. And I hope that movement will continue at pace, that we won't get delays, and sometimes, you know, legislation gets held up in one or other house or waiting for a slot at committee and so on. So hopefully they move fairly, you know, rapidly through the houses, and that we see the positive benefits of that reform as quickly as possible. The assisted decision-making capacity bill also is something we've waited a very long time for. So they're two very welcome developments, I think. I think on the downside, the issues relating to mental health, I think, very often relate to the whole of the health service. And I think one of the biggest challenges for health services at the moment is the recruitment and retention of staff. It's a huge problem. So we're now in a situation where money is being allocated to different elements of services. And the problem is that there's an inability to spend that because the staff aren't available. And I think there's two elements of that. The first is that, you know, it's a self-fulfilling thing. If the health service, the Irish Health Service, is not a positive and supportive place to work for people, and if it becomes too stressful, then people will leave and go to work in other sectors or go abroad to work in systems that are properly functioning. And that, of course, creates more pressures on the people who are left behind. And I also think then there's an issue about ensuring that we have enough people trained to actually meet the need that's there. And I have a serious concern just about the lack of workforce planning. And I think there is a need for a national task force to be developed to ensure that we're matching up the level of need within mental health services and in terms of the health service generally. And we can predict what population size is going to be, you know, over the next 5-10 years, what the level of need will be, and the number of different therapists and health personnel that we'll need. And what we need to do is match that with the training places in the third level colleges. And that's not happening at the moment. So, you know, there's a serious mismatch there. And we have that crazy situation where money is provided and yet the staff aren't available, or the HSE or whatever agency struggles to get the staff. So I think that's something that needs urgent attention. The other thing I would say is that we need to keep a very close eye just on what's happening, particularly in relation to CAM services. I mean, we saw what happened in Kerry South and the shocking situation there. And it has already been raised today. If there are multidisciplinary teams across the country, it's one thing having the teams, it's another thing having them fully staffed. And like, it's only a skeleton service unless it's fully staffed. And I think that is a real shortcoming, and that needs to be an absolute priority for the coming year. And that means providing the funding for training places and providing funding for fully staffing them and matching up those two. And that would be what I would see as the priority for the coming year. Thanks, Bert.
Thanks so much, Deputy Shortall. And I'm delighted that you've re-emphasised some of the things that we're asking for in our pre-budget submission, which is wonderful, you know, and I think that's something we've seen over the past year as well, is that there is a lot of commitment and goodwill behind progressing mental health services. But as you said, we just have to get, you know, we have to get the legislation through. rapidly, and we need to be looking at things as a whole. And that would tie into our ask around the national lead for mental health in the HSE. And I know we've all been in touch with the HSE calling for the reinstatement of that national lead, because there are some community health organizations where things are working better than others, and let's share that information across the board. And just when you said about third level as well, you probably heard Deputy Minister Simon Harris was on Morning Ireland this morning talking about multi-annual funding for the education sector, and I was listening thinking that's what we're asking for as well, for multi-annual funding for the community and voluntary sector providing mental health services. So it is good to, when you hear those things being done in other areas. Deputy Burke, I might come to you next, just about apart from your party down in Cork the other night with you. I'm very jealous now. We were invited down, but we weren't able to make down, so it would have been lovely to meet you there. But we're delighted to have you with us again this afternoon. So if you want to talk to us a bit about what you think over the past year, positives and areas for improvement.
Yeah, sorry, I lost my internet connection there for about 3 or 4 minutes, so my apologies about that. I suppose, if you look at the budget in relation to health, the overall health budget at 22.5 billion last year, that was an increase of 1 billion. The issue now is that you have a huge number of competing forces within that health budget, and the priority is to try and get additional funding for mental health. I think I would agree with all of the presentations here this morning that there is an increased demand for support services. And I think one of the problems that we have now is that the world is moving far faster than ever before, but there's a lot of people who are feeling left behind, and they do not have the same support levels that they would normally have. And you go back over the years, the support of family, that isn't there. And then remember, we've also very much changed here in Ireland in that we have so many people in from abroad here as well. It's not so long ago, I had someone who was from outside of the European Union here who had mental health problems, and they literally had no one here to give them any kind of support. Fine, they were admitted to a mental health facility for 8 or 10 weeks, but when they came back out, they had little or no support within the system, and that's going to be a growing problem that we have. And I do think that, you take all of the organisations there that are providing support, like Cork Counselling Services, that we need to, Hugh referred to the 2009, the change in pay, and that those voluntary organisations haven't been allowed to catch up. And I think that's something that we need to seriously look at and try and make sure that there's additional funding provided for, because if they weren't there, there is no way that the current health system would be able to deal with them. The other big challenge that we have in relation to the whole mental health area is in relation to staffing. We already have the problem in relation to home care. We have a problem there in getting people for that. We have a problem in relation to our nursing homes, but we also have a problem in relation to the mental health services. And yes, I would agree with Roisin in the sense of increasing training, but the problem that we have then, you're competing on a world market, anything in relation to health, you're competing on a world market where people can get up and go. They can go to the UK, they can go to Australia, New Zealand, the States, Canada, and that's the problem that we have to look at as well. How do we make it attractive to keep people here after we've provided the training? And then how can we make sure that we increase the number of training places right across the board in a whole lot of areas dealing with mental health? And for instance, I heard of one of the consultant posts advertised recently where they had a difficulty getting a consultant. I understand that the person who's now coming in take up the post is from outside of the European Union, that we can't get even people from within the European Union to apply for posts here. And that's now a huge challenge that we have. And we're having that problem right across the board. It's not just mental health, but in a whole area, a range of areas in relation to healthcare now where we cannot physically get consultants to get to apply for posts. And they're having the same problem, I suppose, in the UK as well. For instance, in the UK, my understanding is that there's a shortage of over 5,000 GPs in the UK at the present time. So we need to know how can we keep ahead of other countries by both training, but also the important thing of keeping the people that we have and making sure that the structure there. And also we need to make sure that where staff run into difficulties themselves, remember staff also require support. And I'm not convinced that we have adequate support for staff who are working in mental health services, because it is an extremely demanding area. And I think if we want to keep staff, we've got to give them the support that they require as well. I think that's an extremely important part, whether the people are working with, many of the organizations who are providing support for mental health, people with mental health difficulties, but also within the HSE itself.
They're all really good points. Deputy Burke, thank you so much. And actually, when you're talking there about people working in the services as well, so we've partnered recently with the HSE's, the Mental Health Engagement and Recovery Office, which is led by Michael Ryan, who is a person with lived experience of mental health difficulties. And we did 4 roadshows. We were down in Cork as well. And like that, the roadshows were open to everyone to come along, and the amount of people who are now working in peer support or who are family support workers, who have come through experiencing difficulties, gone to recovery colleges, linking in with advocacy support. So there does seem to be an increased recognition around, having peer support and advocacy work as well. But the other thing I'm thinking while you're talking is, we have an opportunity, Ireland has an opportunity now to be a leader in human rights compliant, person-centred mental health legislation. And how amazing. Now, I know it's multifaceted, I know the recruitment and retention issues are absolutely multifaceted and can't be solved overnight. But if we had that passion and drive to be completely human rights compliant, putting the person at the centre of our legislation, including the Assisted Decision Making Capacity Act, and fostering, just being a world leader. And we have that opportunity now with the 2 pieces of legislation. And I think, we know that if you've more human rights compliant legislation, you're less likely, you have lower rates of staff turnover and things like that as well. So it is about creating the positive work environment for everyone. Everyone involved. So with that, I'm going to go over to Deputy Ward now. I know I said you're on the 2 committees, but we won't expect you to give us updates from both of them. But do you want to talk us through a little bit, Deputy Ward, about what you think, something positive, and then what the areas for improvement?
Thanks, Bear, and I'm really enjoying the conversation today. I think it's really worthwhile, and it's very beneficial for myself, and I say, and the other members here as well. Just you mentioned there, I am in a unique position in being on the subcommittee for mental health and also on the Children's Disability Equality, Integration and Youth Committee, which these really the 2 pieces of important legislation are going through, and they are welcome they're going through, because Ireland, as you said, has an opportunity to be more human rights compliant in both pieces of legislation. The Mental Health Act is currently, the pre-legislative scrutiny report is currently being produced at the moment. I know myself and Senator Black and other members will have submitted a number of amendments into this report to make that more human rights compliant and to make a person-centred as well. So that's a really good opportunity. But as was mentioned earlier on, the Act itself, well, it's really good, it's really important, but if it doesn't get the appropriate and adequate funding to support that Act when it's implemented, then it won't be worth the paper it's written on. So we need to, that's a challenge that we need to make sure that happens. You did mention that as well, the Assisted Decision Making Capacity Act. It's a really important piece of legislation that updates Ireland's outdated wardship of court system, and basically it's updating the Lunacy Act, which even the language of that alone is still an act. It says that it really does need to be updated. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than what it was, and we still have an opportunity, even at this late stage, when the legislation goes to the Seanad, where we can make amendments there to improve the legislation further. And I'm hoping the Minister will take on board some of the amendments that are going to be made to and particularly to include those people who are involuntarily detained under the Mental Health Act to be included into this Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act, because at the moment they are the only cohort of people who are excluded from this. So it's vitally important. As you said, we have an absolutely brilliant opportunity to make Ireland the world leader, and I'm afraid if people detained under the Mental Health Act are not included in this legislation, we could miss that opportunity. So I think we should use every opportunity we can to make sure that these people are included. What needs to be improved? Bear, how long have you got? and I don't want to be
5 minutes there.
No, and I don't want to be. And I'll simplify things. Like even since I took this role as a Sinn Féin spokesperson, it's basically for people to get the help they need when and where they need it. It's as simple as that. You mentioned like care delayed is care denied, and early intervention is key, and it can stop people from needing more acute services and more financially dependent services as they go forward in that. So if they get the care early, they're less likely to need more acute services. The scandal in South Kerry CAMHS highlighted the inadequacies in the service, and I know it was mentioned earlier on, like over 240 children placed at some form of harm. But out of that scandal and out of that tragedy, we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity now at the moment. There's an audit being done on CAMHS, and there's a review being done on practices within CAMHS. So we have an opportunity out of that tragedy and out of that scandal to make CAMHS a better place. But we must learn the lessons. There's no point doing reviews, no point doing audits unless we're going to implement the changes that are recommended in them. So that's another challenge that we have. We also need to see, because that was very noteworthy in CAMHS when we had the HSE in front of the Mental Health Subcommittee, the need for a national director for mental health. We need that. The minister has been calling for it. I think it has cross-party support calling for it, and the HSE seem to be reluctant to put that in place. But we need to see that. So the buck stops with somebody, and then we have that oversight and that level of governance that's needed. Just a little point that you brought up, because I'm always, and I was delighted when Suzanne mentioned earlier, when she got in behind the stats, because at the moment there's 4,000 children plus waiting for appointment with CAMHS. There's 11,000 children waiting for primary care psychology, 4,000 children waiting for over a year. But as you said, behind each one of them stats, there's a child. There's a child with hopes, a child with dreams, there's a child with ambitions, there's a family that are supporting that child, there's a community that's supporting that family. It's an impact. It's like throwing a stone into a lake. The ripple effect has on everybody. And it's so important that we get the early intervention for these children as early as possible. And at the moment, children are being denied the opportunity to reach their full potential and all the developmental milestones. And I seen that mental health reforms team today is the cost of waiting. That's the really human cost of waiting for these children and even some adults as well when they're not getting the care that we need. And we need to make sure that we have basically the early intervention, the foundations in place that people get the care they need when they need it and where they need it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Deputy Ward. Yeah, and you're so right. And you did remind me of Susanna's piece about, you know, it is, we can look at stats and facts and figures all the time, but they are people. And just to come back to Deputy Burke's point that I didn't touch on, some people don't have the family support. So, you know, they might, the community and voluntary services or sectors that might be in their community or their GP, or if they're in any sort of kind of supported accommodation or things like that, you know. So it's the communities, and as you say, that ripple effect, Mark, that you said there, you know, it's so true. And we have this opportunity, and I think as you said as well about South Kerry CAMHS, we have to learn from our mistakes, you know. So it's exactly what you said, like out of these tragedies, we have to make something different. We owe it to the people who have been let down or hurt by services to make those changes. And that's why, you know, we really do hope that in our pragmatic, costed pre-budget submission that's looking at the things that were already committed for 2023, you know, there were loads of things we wanted to ask for, but these are the things that are already set out in our National Mental Health Policies implementation plan, you know, so they've already been talked about and costed, and they're promised. So we're saying that we can't wait any longer. You know, the cost of waiting, it's too great for the person, for their family and supports, and for the communities. So I'm going to come over to Senator Black, our chair of the subcommittee, who's probably sick of hearing from me. Thanks so much, Senator, for
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for, I want to thank you and all at Mental Health Reform for inviting me to participate in this absolutely wonderful event. And might I add that the Mental Health Reform pre-budget submission is a rigorous and compelling account of the massive challenges facing the Irish government in its work on the issue of mental health, and the resources and commitment it will take to make real progress. Your question is a somewhat difficult one, Bear, only because Ireland's treatment of mental health is in a decidedly, I believe, ambiguous phase. You know, we have those two powerful pieces of legislation. They're very welcome, warmly welcome. And, you know, I just also want to, again, thank Mental Health Reform for your contributions to the Oireachtas Subcommittee on Mental Health. I mean, it's just, you know, it's been phenomenal, the work that you've done, and your consistent and reliable source of expertise. You have an unerring commitment to human rights and social justice, and it's mind-blowing from my perspective, because I have learned so much from you, and I just wanted to add that. So as I say, the positives is the two pieces of legislation that's coming through. What's also welcome, I suppose, is that after the ratification of the UNCRPD, there is broad political agreement about the need to move forward with a rights-oriented approach to mental health care, and I think that's powerful. You know, in the subcommittee meeting surrounding the review of the Mental Health Act, we heard from, you know, many representatives of professionals working in mental health care, for example, social workers and psychologists, and I suppose a significant majority of those we spoke to advocated for a human rights centred approach, and I think this is very encouraging. You know, that agreement on first principles allows us to begin the difficult work of making sure, you know, this understanding is translated to the policy making and the clinical level. So yeah, and that's really, really good. However, this enlightened attitude is certainly not reflected, I believe, in the reality of mental health services in Ireland, which is sad. I'm saddened to say that. The finding, you know, referenced in the pre-budget submission of the 50% of respondents had a distinctly negative experience of mental health services, and it is a stark reminder of our failures. You know, the dangerously long wait lists for access to care, the continued practice of placing adolescents in adult wards, and the closures of restrictions of services due to staffing shortages. They all point to central issues of staff recruitment, just like what others have said, the staff recruitment and retention, and the funding necessary to expand service provision to meet that demand. Recruiting and retaining healthcare workers is an issue that comes up nearly in every single meeting of the Health Committee and the Mental Health Committee, and it's no doubt about it, it's a complex and multifaceted, but essentially it comes down to our health service inability to deliver a decent work-life balance. You know, the housing situation and the cost of living crisis making many parts of the country, particularly Dublin, unaffordable for most healthcare workers, and the strong demand for Irish healthcare, you know, talent abroad. I mean, we went up to visit the Children's Hospital recently, and while it's a beautiful facility and wonderful and everything, I would be concerned around the staffing issue also. So I think fixing these issues will require structural changes, and I suppose I can't lay out a complete solution here, but one thing that seems clear to me is that there needs to be greater government support for social work, psychology and nursing students, and therapists in general. I mean, the expectation that they perform, and there's an awful lot of burnout, you know, in the area of mental health, and in my own work, like the Rise Foundation, I see it, you know, and the work that our therapists do, for example, is just phenomenal. I don't know how they keep going. There's such a demand for the services. you know, so the expectation that you know, people who work in this area perform large amounts of work to qualify for little to no remuneration is nearly insulting and off-putting, to be honest with you. And students who devote their energy and their talents to caring for others need to be encouraged and supported and looked after and cared for, and you know, they need to feel the gratitude of the state to which they make such an invaluable contribution. And I have to say, I totally endorse mental health reform suggestions that funding for recruitment needs to be ring-fenced to ensure it's spent. You know, the government needs to experiment with multi-year funding so that organisations providing these services can engage in staff planning and workers can enjoy greater security. And so I suppose many of the issues that our mental health services, you know, face come down to insufficient funding. I mean, that's the bottom line. The fact that Ireland spends just 6% of its healthcare budget on mental health is unjustifiable and unsustainable. And I think mental health reform's demand for funding that amounts to at least 10% as promised in this Launch report is one that everyone can get behind. And yeah, so I mean, that's basically what I want to say today. I totally agree with what Mark says around early intervention. I mean, early intervention is key, and I think Sinead's video, first of all, apologies for being late. I had something this morning, but Sinead's video is powerful, you know what I mean? And what she said there at the end is so true. Like, if we can, you know, get the children who are really struggling at this point, if we can get them into their own healing and recovery, it changes their lives in adulthood, but it also changes their whole families. I mean, it's like, you know, it stops it breaks the cycle, I suppose. It breaks the cycle. So you're not just dealing with that one individual. Early intervention is about breaking the cycle in general. So anyway, I might have talked too much there. So thanks so much again, and thanks a million to Mental Health Reform for your phenomenal work that you're doing. Gormina Haggard. I put myself on mute.
Thanks so much, Senator Black. I would have let you keep going on there, talking about how great we are in mental health reform. It's always nice to hear when you're putting in the hard work, and it's always nice to hear when it's appreciated and it's useful, you know. And I suppose on that point, I know we'll have our slide at the end, but on our website on mentalhealthreform.ie, not only is there our pre-budget submission and the 2-page summary, but there also are the reports that Susanna was speaking about in her presentation and that are referenced in the pre-budget submission. And just something you said there about and it's interesting that recruitment and retention has come up throughout. You'll see that one of our suggestions relating to recruitment and retention is even to have maternity cover in the mental health teams, because as it is, if someone goes on maternity leave, then there's just that gap in the service again. So there are so many small things, tangible things that can be done that would make a real difference. And you'll see in the full pre-budget submission, which I think Susanna did a great job of making it sound super interesting. It's what you want to be reading on a Saturday night instead of going out. And I'm telling you, it won't disappoint. Because there's lots of things like that in it. And I'm really glad as well that you mentioned about the UN CRPD, so the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, because people with mental health difficulties do have rights under the UN CRPD because it's known as psychosocial disabilities. Obviously, people will identify how they want to identify, either with a diagnosis or without, but the rights are there under the UN CRPD and under the Equal Status Acts and all of that kind of stuff. So access to employment, you know, we're talking about the individual placement and support scheme as well in tenancy sustainment officers, housing, you know, all of those things, you know, the rights are there, I suppose. And the more we talk about things and reduce the stigma around mental health, the more hopefully people will be empowered. So I know we're coming up to finishing up time, but I want to ask, I know you've all kind of touched on it a bit in your contributions, but the priority, if you could pick a priority for mental health in budget 2023, what would that priority be for you? I'll come back to you, Deputy Shortall. You're on mute. I was wondering if I'd get to say it through the piece.
Sorry about that. It's hard to pick one.
Yeah.
One point I'm just going to make is that it's a very strong view of my own, and it was supported there in Sinead's video, and that is concern about the over-medicalization of the treatment of people with mental health issues. And you know, we heard talk there about the need to have talk therapies and other therapies available. And too often we take a very medical route and, you know, feel that unless somebody sees a consultant and continues to see a consultant, that they can't receive appropriate services. And I feel very strongly about the need to have access to counselling services, and at an early stage. Mm-hmm. And, you know, early intervention is so critically important, and we should be concentrating much more on talk therapies, in my view, and the other therapies without, you know, going the route of meds. And too often meds are the only option available to people. And I think that's an absolute priority that we need to deal with. And it's very much in line with Sláinte Care about, you know, the lowest level of complexity. Sometimes, you know, we feel it has to be all hospital-based, consultant-based and all of that. People end up waiting 2 or 3 years to see a consultant. Whereas, you know, with early intervention, with counselling and other therapies, very often, you know, that can make the world of difference to a person, whether that's an adult or a child. So I think that's a really important thing. We need to change that model of care and have services available locally and as early as possible. So that, plus of course meeting the 10%, they would be my priorities. And thanks again for all the work that you do in mental health reform.
Thanks, Deputy Shortall. No, and there you've reminded me, and this is why I love this kind of format of the panels, the way things can come up organically, is obviously at the moment there's, with the war in Ukraine, we know that there's been an increase in people seeking asylum coming to Ireland, and we have, mental health reform has a cultural competency toolkit. So even before kind of the crisis and the war in Ukraine, we were working with different groups around culturally appropriate services and care. So I'm thinking as well ethnic minorities and traveller groups. So even when you're talking about early intervention and counselling, it's that kind of culturally appropriate counselling. So if you're a member of the traveller community, you know, maybe you want to see a counsellor who's also a member of the traveller community, you know, so it's that we're diversifying our access to supports. There's my alarm going off because I knew I'd keep chatting to you all. So I'll come back to Deputy Burke now for your priority. Thanks so much, Roisin. Thanks.
Yeah, I think my priority is that, you know, it was what Hugh raised earlier about the whole issue. If we want to keep people, then we're going to have to give them the support. And, you know, especially the people that are working in the organisations outside of the HSE. And we also need to give support of staff working within the HSE, but in particular, the people working outside, because they don't have the same level of the income issue, the pension issue. We need to look at that, and I think that needs to be a priority, because if we don't have the people, then we're going to have longer and longer waiting lists. And I'll just give you a simple example in relation to mental health. This is a mental health facility where they had 26 residents. And would you believe that during COVID, there was no changing facilities for nursing staff? Just a simple thing like that, where someone hadn't seen that. And like, that's not the way. You're putting everyone at risk. Therefore, no matter where the facility is, no matter what the organization is, we must look after staff. And I think if we want to keep people, we have to give them their supports. And the other issue I think is a priority for people working in the whole mental health area is the people providing the care, that they're also given support when they need it. Because there's always difficult days, there's difficult weeks, there's difficult months. It's important that they get the support. Otherwise, they're just going to retire out of the service and move on to another area of employment. And I think they're the two issues that I think are so important in order. And remember, our population is increasing. We're going up by 1.2 million people in the last 20 years. You know, the average increase in population is 60,000 per annum every year over the last 20. This year, the population is going to increase by 150,000. people mightn't agree with me on that, but that's my analysis. Therefore, we've got to keep everyone that we have and then try and make sure we make it attractive to get new people in as well.
Yeah, you reminded me that we're all waiting for the census results and reports and everything. I think those of us who love this political stuff and policy stuff, it's always great to get. I know we're talking about the people, but it is good to have kind of the overview of the statistics and the numbers and exactly how many people are affected by different pieces and age demographics, all of that kind of stuff. So I know a lot of us will be waiting for that, and it will help inform the work that we're doing. And just it would be remiss of me just not to give another shout out to the work that our 81 member organizations do on the ground, on the front line, through community and voluntary. You know, we have a Brave New Connections report on our website, which indicates really well how quickly the sector just switched overnight when COVID hit, you know, and they've been telling us about the longer term impact of the COVID pandemic on their services and the need for their services, and how, you know, moving more into kind of helplines and urgent care, you know, that then maybe is taking away resources from the kind of the longer term projects and things that they will be doing. So that's why we've called for, I think it's 20 million additional funding for the community and voluntary sector in our pre-budget submission. So Deputy Ward, your priority. We'll unmute you.
I'll mute it there. Thanks, Bear. And I'll reiterate, I really enjoyed the discussion today. It's great to get everybody's opinion on that. I'll go back to what I said. Early intervention is key, but without the necessary staff or the appropriate staff in place, then people won't get that early intervention. And to me, the panel system of recruitment within the HSE just needs to be reviewed, it needs to be overhauled, and it's not working. And I'll give you just one example, and I'll put it in the context of the 11,000 children who I mentioned earlier on, who are waiting for primary care psychology. So the HSE and through the government fund trainee clinical psychologists to the tune of 38 million. Okay, over the last 5 years, they spent 38 million, which is really, really welcome. And in my opinion, it needs to be expanded into educational psychologists and also into counselling psychologists. But they spent 38 million on that. And part of the deal is that once qualified, these newly qualified clinical psychologists, if offered a job within the HSE, would take that job up. Okay. Over the last 5 years, not one of these newly qualified, despite having worked in the HSE, doing their training, not one of these newly qualified clinical psychologists have been offered a job within the HSE after a 38 million investment. They're being lost to the public services. As Deputy Burke said, they may be leaving the country, they may be going into other organisations. And that's money that is being spent, and it looks like on paper that it's being spent in the right places, but we're getting nothing for it as a public service. So there's some of the things that needs to be looked at. So the panel system, to me, in the HSE is not working in the recruitment and the retention of staff. Other ways, and I'll go back to what Deputy Burke said earlier on as well, around making things more attractive for people to stay in the workplace. That's going back, and that's a whole raft of work that's cross-departmental. So that's years of failures in housing, in education, in infrastructure, in health. All these failures are making it less attractive for people to stay, not just within the health system, but within Ireland as well. And we also need to move away from, last year, the Minister announced a couple of tranches of one-off funding, quite significant funding. I think there was over 30 million of one-off funding that was time limited and had to be spent in a certain amount of time. Rush spending is to me is bad spending. Your 81 organisations that you mentioned here, if they had the opportunity to have multi-annual funding where they could forward plan and they could have strategic plans in place, my God, that would make such a difference to everybody. So we need to move away from them models and start putting in place this multi-annual funding. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And Senator Black, I think there might have been an issue with your sound the first time, Francis. We could hear you, but just in case, so I'm going to go on mute. Just your priority for us for budget 2023.
Okay, can you hear me? I suppose pressing issues that I hope the budget can play a role in addressing. I totally agree with what Roisin said around the talk therapy and the importance of it, and it's vital actually for an awful lot of people going away from the kind of the medical model. I think that's something that has to be prioritised going forward. people just need to be heard. You know, I mean, if somebody's in crisis and there's trauma going on in their lives, it's really important that they get in and get that time with a qualified therapist to sit down and just talk it through. So I totally agree with that. The other one, I suppose, I mean, it's a long-standing issue of the mental health crisis in the travelling community. We know that. You know, just before the Shannon went on recess, I had the privilege of responding to the Special Committee on Issues Facing the Travelling Community report that was chaired by my own colleague, Senator Eileen Flynn, and I spoke about the horrific statistics that indicate the extent of the crisis. You know, suicide accounts for 11% of all deaths among travellers. It's shocking, really. And so I think, you know, the pain that many families and communities are grappling with is unimaginable within the travelling community. And I just think this issue, it hasn't really been acknowledged, and no action has been really taken. So I'd like to see ring-fenced funding for the provision of mental health services to the travelling community. And, you know, that's one of the things. I suppose the other, the government's mental health strategy on sharing the vision emphasises autonomy and human rights, which I think is extremely welcome. And I suppose to concrete those principles is very important, and advocacy and decision-making support services must get adequate funding. So that must be, I believe, reflected in 2023. And then finally, I suppose I have to mention the work that I do myself with family members who have somebody they love with an alcohol, drug or gambling problem. I mean, look, we have a waiting list at the moment. Rise Foundation gets no funding whatsoever, and we're dealing with family members who are in a mental health crisis. They're not in the actual addiction themselves, but they're in the trauma of addiction, and they're living on the front line. And it's not that their loved one is a bad person, or that it's not to in any way blame the person who has been in addiction. It's just addiction is a very, very insidious disorder or disease, and it really impacts families in a really destructive way. And the Rise Foundation, we have, you know, really good therapists who are able to run a program, a 10-week family program. We have an aftercare program, we have one-to-one service, and gets no funding. I think that, and the work that we do is breaking the cycle of generations going forward. We get no funding, so that's very frustrating from our perspective. So of course I have to talk about the Rise Foundation and say I'd like to see it somewhere in the mix in it all. So I think that's it. And I'd also like to see a little bit, I suppose, around dual diagnosis as well, because I think that's very, very important going forward. I think dual diagnosis is vital, and, you know, addiction and mental health go hand in hand, there's no doubt about it, you know what I mean? So, and there's some kind of a moral kind of judgment in all of that needs to be taken out of it, do you know what I mean? So that's it really. I again, I hope I haven't spoken for too long. Thanks again for the opportunity for coming here today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Senator Black. No, it's been really, the contributions have been really great. I know I've run a little bit over time. I'm going to be handing back over to Michelle Kerrigan, but just to say a huge thank you again to Social Democrats co-leader and party spokesperson on health, Roisin Shortall, Sinn Féin spokesperson on mental health, Mark Ward, Fine Gael spokesperson on health, Colin Burke, and our Senator Frances Black, our chair of the subcommittee on mental health. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to all of your questions and further engagement in the next month as we roll up to the 27th of September. So I'm going to hand this back over to Michelle Kerrigan, who's the chair of our board in mental health reform and the CEO of Grow Mental Health. So thanks so much, everyone. Talk to you soon.
I just would like to reiterate what you've just said there, Ber, in relation to everybody's contribution this afternoon. It has been very insightful. There are a lot of challenges facing the mental health budget and the 81 organisations who are the membership of mental health reform. But I think if there's a will, we can get through it. We certainly do have to prioritise what we need to be doing, but also not alone looking at budgets that we currently need, we should also be forward planning as well into the future, because we've just said there a few moments ago that you know, the statistics will be coming out shortly. So that actually gives us the momentum and also the information that we need to forward plan what mental health budgets are required into the future. It is definitely going to be challenging. I was really struck by Sinead's video. And one of the things that struck me about it is that we were talking about her child who has quite a complicated mental health issues. However, we forget, and sometimes we do forget, that behind that child there is a mother, a father, and other children who are also impacted, and their mental health can also be impacted by the fact of having somebody with such severe issues and trying to deal with them as a family. And for many of those people, sometimes the family can break down, which, you know, dilutes the support that family members have when a child is actually having challenging issues. So we could, of those 4,000 plus children, you could add on another 8,000 or 12,000 people that are impacted by those children, who are caring for them and supporting them as well. I think that the figures are quite stark in relation to the waiting lists and the long waiting lists that there are. But all we can do is really push forward and have a collaborative approach in relation to the health services that we have, but also the voluntary and community sector, who have a significant role to play as well. So together we should be moving forward in relation to the mental health needs of the country. At this point, I would just like to say that I know you all have given of your time very freely this afternoon, so I'm not going to hold you for too much longer. But I would just like to say that for anybody who has been impacted by the issues raised, can actually gain support from the website, the mental health, Your Mental Health website, where there will be a list of organizations who can help and assist people who may be struggling or may have been impacted by this afternoon's discussion. Also, we'd like for people to get involved in relation to lobbying for improved mental health services by contacting your local TDs, and the information is online at the moment. Also to go to the Mental Health Reform's website to get the full pre-budget submission, and also to follow us on our social media and using the hashtags cost of living, #budget23. It just remains for me to thank our panelists this morning, the Deputies Shortall, Ward and Burke. So thank you very much for your input and your engaging conversations this afternoon, and to Senator Frances Black for your contribution this afternoon as well. I'd also like to thank Paula Lawler of Suicide or Survive, and also Hugh Morley of Cork Counselling Services. Both gave lovely descriptions of the work that they're involved in and the commitment of both their staff and their volunteers in order to support people who have difficulties with their mental health. I'd also like to thank the Mental Health Reform team, who have done Trojan work in the background in order to prepare the submission, the pre-budget submission, and to circulate it out to the member organizations and having it on the website. The work that they have done is that they're really, it's just powerful, and the dedication that they have in relation to the work that they do. Just like to thank you all. I'd like to thank the 81 member organizations who have helped us to input into the pre-budget submission as well. And as I said, please follow us on social media, retweet, or go onto Instagram and just get the conversation started about mental health. And just enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And thank you all so much for all your contributions and for your time. Thank you.